What did the man who conquered half the ancient world eat to fuel his impossible campaigns? Not golden feasts, not exotic delicacies, something far more unexpected. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the stomach of a legend, Alexander the Great, the man who never lost a battle, the king who wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. But here's a question nobody asks: what was actually on his plate? Before we open his royal lunchbox, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Little Historical. And let me know in the comments, could you survive on Alexander's diet? Because what you're about to discover might change how you see the greatest conqueror in history. You've heard about his battles, his conquests, his untimely death at 32. But have you ever wondered, what did Alexander the Great actually eat for breakfast? Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the stomach of a legend, the man who forged an empire from Greece to India, the warrior who never asked his soldiers to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and that included food. Before we open his royal lunchbox, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Little Historical. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Because the truth about Alexander's diet reveals something surprising about the man behind the myth. Imagine waking up every morning knowing you will conquer cities before sunset. Now imagine your breakfast is a bowl of salty mush and bread so hard it could stop a sword. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the stomach of a legend. Alexander the Great didn't just change the map of the ancient world, he changed it on an empty stomach, or a stomach full of things that would make you think twice. Before we open his royal lunchbox, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Little Historical. And here's a question to hold in your mind. What single food did Alexander eat more than any other, even when Persian chefs offered him gold-plated banquets? The answer will surprise you.
You have probably imagined Alexander the Great dining on golden plates beneath silk canopies, his table groaning with roasted boar and honeyed figs. But the truth, the strange and unsettling truth, begins long before the crowns and the conquests. Before he was the man who made the world kneel, young Alexander of Macedon sat down each morning to a breakfast that was aggressively ordinary, almost punishingly simple. Picture a cold, grey dawn in the royal palace. The torches are still sputtering. The only sound is the wind scratching at the stone walls. And there, at a wooden table, the future conqueror lifts a spoon to his lips. What fills that spoon is not a feast. It is boiled barley gruel, a thick, warm mush that tastes of salt and earth and nothing more. On better days, a splash of goat's milk might transform it from punishment into mere obligation. Beside the bowl sits a piece of bread made from emmer or barley flour. This is not the soft, forgiving bread, you know. This loaf is dense, rough, and so stubbornly hard that a boy must tear it with his teeth like a young wolf claiming its first meal. Olives appear too, bitter and brine-soaked, as if to remind him that sweetness is a weakness. And then there is the cheese. Goat cheese, aged until it fights back, its pungency sharp enough to clear a young prince's sinuses and perhaps his dreams of comfort. To wash it all down, wine. But do not imagine anything intoxicating or joyful. This wine is heavily diluted, practically purple water, just enough to kill the germs and just little enough to leave him still thirsty. You might wonder why a king's son would eat like a field hand. The answer is not about poverty. It is about conditioning. Alexander's father, King Philip II, understood that a ruler who cannot stomach simple food will never earn the loyalty of hungry soldiers. Every bitter olive, every tooth-breaking crust, every bland spoonful of gruel was a lesson carved into the boy's bones. Luxury makes you soft. Comfort invites betrayal. And so young Alexander learned to chew without complaint, to swallow without longing, and to rise from the table still wanting. That breakfast was the first conquest of every day, and it was only the beginning of a much stranger, darker relationship with food. Because if you think his mornings were harsh, Wait until you hear what he ate while marching through the desert with men who would have killed for just one of those bitter olives. And so the boy who learned to swallow bitter olives without flinching grew into a young king marching his army through the furnace of the Persian desert. The sun peeled the skin from their shoulders. Their sandals became leather regrets, and their throats felt personally cursed by the gods. This was not a campaign of golden tables and perfumed wine. This was survival carved from dust and desperation. And the food that kept Alexander and his men moving would make a modern soldier weep. Picture a linen pouch, sweat-stained and dust-caked, pulled open to reveal the daily ration. First, the bread, but not the bread of the palace. This loaf was barley, baked twice until it achieved the consistency of ceramic tile. Soldiers called it food, but they also used it as a blunt instrument. To eat it, you had to soak it in wine or water for what felt like an eternity, then tear at it with your teeth like a man fighting for his next breath. Next came the meat, salted beyond recognition. Goat or beef, dried until it became more mineral than muscle. This was not the tender jerky of a camping trip. This was ancient dental testing material, a challenge wrapped in a curse. And yet Alexander chewed the same strip, swallowed the same grit, and never asked for better. Onions and garlic rode in every pouch, cheap, pungent, and believed to boost stamina. They also ensured that no enemy could stand downwind of a Macedonian phalanx without reconsidering his life choices. For sweetness, there were dried figs or dates, sticky and chewy with a texture somewhere between leather and regret. They were the ancient energy bar, portable and marginally less offensive than the bread. And to drink? Diluted wine again, mixed just strong enough to kill the bacteria in whatever murky water they found, but weak enough to keep a man sober enough to fight. But the most famous moment of Alexander's desert diet did not involve eating at all. It involved refusing to drink. One soldier, stumbling through the heat, found a meager puddle. It was not a spring, it was a muddy, frog-adjacent stain on the earth. He scooped the water into his helmet and offered it to his king. Alexander looked at the offering. He looked at his men, their cracked lips, their sunken eyes. And then, in front of every exhausted soul watching, he poured the water onto the ground. He would not drink what his soldiers could not share. That gesture turned thirst into loyalty and desperation into legend. But a king cannot survive on gestures alone, and what Alexander ate next, when the desert finally released them, would reveal something much darker about the conqueror's appetite. The desert released them at last, but what waited beyond the sand was not mercy. It was Persia, a land of silk cushions, gold-plated dishes, and kitchens that employed more cooks than Alexander had generals. When the Macedonian army poured into the Persian palaces, they found something their barley-hardened minds could barely process. Tables groaned under slow-roasted lamb, glazed with pomegranate. Rice steamed with saffron, fragrant enough to make a soldier forget his name. Sauces that had been aged longer than some of the men had been alive. And wine, not the watery purple of Macedonia, but dark and thick and strong enough to need its own map. This was the culinary fever dream of an empire that had perfected pleasure. And Alexander, the boy who had choked down bitter olives and rock-hard bread, now stood at its center. He did not refuse it. He was no fool. He tasted the saffron rice. He tried the honeyed quail. He even permitted himself a sip of that dangerously strong wine. But here is where the story turns strange and tense. Because while his soldiers stumbled through the feast like children in a treasure vault, Alexander watched. He ate sparingly. He drank carefully. He never reclined on the silk couches the way Persian nobles did. Instead, he sat upright, on a simple chair he had brought with him, chewing his bread and roasted meat with the quiet intensity of a man who knew that every bite was a political statement. The Persian courtiers, watching from the corners, whispered among themselves. Was he rude? Was he afraid? Or was he sending a message more powerful than any battle cry? Luxury makes you soft. Comfort invites betrayal. He had learned that lesson at his father's table, and he would not unlearn it now. Some nights, when the feasting grew too lavish, he would rise mid-meal and walk out into the darkness, leaving behind the half-eaten gold and the bewildered guests. His own generals began to worry. Was their king becoming too Persian? Too soft? That suspicion would fester in the wine-soaked banquets to come, leading to moments of drunken violence and whispered accusations. But that night, Alexander simply returned to his tent, ate a handful of dried figs, and slept on the ground while the Persian palace glittered behind him. He had conquered their food without letting it conquer him, or so he believed. Because the richest table in the world hides a poison that has nothing to do with spices. And the next course would test not his discipline, but his very soul. The richest table in the world had been laid before him, and Alexander had walked away, still hungry for something the gold plates could not provide. That hunger was not for food, it was for release, for the one thing even a conqueror could not command, and he found it, as so many before him had, at the bottom of a cup. Not the watered wine of his childhood, not the measured sips of a disciplined general, but the dark, thick, dangerously potent wine of Persia, drunk unmixed, the way barbarians drank, the way his own father had drunk himself into rages that ended in exile and assassination attempts. Alexander, who had refused the helmet of muddy water in the desert, now refused to dilute his wine. He told himself it was a test of his strength. He told himself a real king could hold his cup without losing his throne. But the wine whispered something else. It promised escape from the weight of an empire. It offered a few hours where he did not have to be Alexander the Great. He could simply be a young man, roaring with laughter, reciting Homer, daring anyone to outlast him. The feasts grew longer and darker. Men who had crossed deserts together now watched each other over the rims of golden cups, wondering who would speak the wrong toast, who would reveal a hidden grudge. And then came the night in Samarkand. The wine flowed like a river after spring melt. The room grew hot with bodies and accusation. Clytus, the man who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River, stood up and began to speak. He spoke of Philip, the old king. He spoke of battles won without Persian luxuries. He spoke the words that every sober man in the room had thought but never dared to say. Alexander, his vision blurred, his blood burning, reached for a weapon. What happened next was not a battle. It was a tragedy, a spear, a friend, a silence that swallowed the entire banquet hall. When the fog of wine lifted, Alexander saw what his appetite for oblivion had cost him. He held the body of Clytus and wept for 3 days. He refused food, refused water, refused to be consoled. The man who had eaten rock-hard bread without complaint and walked through desert without a drop of water now could not swallow a single bite. Food had no taste. Wine had no escape. Only the cold knowledge that the same hunger that drove him to conquer the world had driven him to destroy a part of it he could never get back. He would eat again, eventually. He would drink again, too. But something had broken inside the conqueror's stomach that night, and the last feast of his life was already being prepared in a city called Babylon, where the wine would flow one final time and the food would carry a secret no taste bud could detect.